Magnus Carlsen, the reigning champion of the Champions Chess Tour Finals, enters this tournament with the weight of his title as the best player of all time. Magnus started the tournament strong, winning his first 2 rounds without much trouble. However, in round 3, Magnus faced Wesley So, the runner-up of last year's Champions Chess Tour Finals. Wesley had been Magnus's opponent in the grand final last year, but fell short of victory. This time, Wesley started strong, defeating Magnus in the first game with the black pieces. This win boosted Wesley's confidence, as he now needed only a draw to secure round 3 against Magnus Carlsen. Wesley opened with d4, and Magnus replied with knight f6. Wesley followed up with c4 and knight c3, while Magnus countered with e6 and bishop b4, entering the Nimzo Indian defense. Wesley chose the classical variation by playing queen c2. Magnus responded with d6, signaling plans for e5 in the future. Wesley then developed his knight to f3, and Magnus brought his knight to d7 to prepare for further action. On move 7, Magnus developed his bishop to b7, eyeing the king side. Wesley castled, securing his king. Magnus initiated the exchange on c3, giving up his bishop for the knight. Then, Magnus pushed knight to e4, attacking the queen. Wesley retreated his queen to c2, while Magnus backed up his knight with f5. Move 11. Wesley found a good move with d5, sacrificing a pawn, with the aim of breaking the connection of e6 and f5, and the knight would advance to d4, threatening Magnus's defense. And it worked. Magnus took d5, then Wesley knight to d4. Wesley's next move was more pressure, with knight to e6 threatening the queen and c7 pawn. At this stage, Wesley had a clear advantage, both on the board and on the clock. The evaluation bar strongly favored Wesley, who had 6 minutes and 21 seconds left, compared to Magnus's 3 minutes and 25 seconds. For most players, being in Magnus's position would seem hopeless, but this was Magnus Carlsen, the best player of all time. The game continued, with Wesley holding on to his lead and Magnus striving to defend. Wesley had an opportunity to increase his advantage by playing knight to g7, but instead he opted for f3, attacking Magnus's knight on e4. Magnus ignored the threat, knowing his knight was well supported, and calmly moved his king to e7, targeting Wesley's knight. Wesley then played knight to g7 to secure his piece, but Magnus countered with queen to f8, both defending the f5 pawn and creating new threats. Wesley repositioned his knight to h5, maintaining his advantage with 4 minutes and 40 seconds left, while Magnus had only 2 minutes and 51 seconds remaining. On move 18, Wesley delivered a check with queen to h4, forcing Magnus to move his king to d2. Wesley pressed on with b4, threatening Magnus's knight. Magnus retreated the knight to e6, and with just 1 minute and 45 seconds remaining, began a critical sequence by offering queen trade, and Wesley accepted. Wesley continued his assault, with f4, targeting Magnus's knight and rook on h8. Magnus responded with rook to g8, creating counterplay by targeting Wesley's king. Wesley solidified his defense with knight to g3. The intensity reached its peak when Magnus sacrificed his rook on g8 to capture the knight on g3. He followed up with knight to g4, attacking Wesley's e3. Wesley immediately struck back with bishop to g4. Magnus pushed a pawn to f5, attacking Wesley's bishop. Although Magnus ran out of attacking options, Wesley advanced with f5, forcing Magnus to move his knight to g5. Wesley retained his advantage, but on move 30, Wesley's lead began to crumble when he played rook to e1, allowing Magnus to seize the initiative. At this point, both players had similar amounts of time, with Wesley at 1 minute and 45 seconds and Magnus at 1 minute and 41 seconds. Magnus immediately capitalized by capturing a5. Wesley tried to counter with a check from f6, but Magnus calmly moved his king to e6. On move 34, Wesley offering a rook trade to simplify the position, but Magnus declined and moved his rook to c8. Wesley continued attacking with rook to g5, targeting Magnus's pawn on g4. Magnus responded with h5 and countered Wesley's rook to g7 with knight to f5, blocking any further progress. The game remained balanced until move 40, when Wesley blundered a rook to a7. Magnus, wasting no time, exploited this with h3, setting up a decisive attack. This was the turning point. Magnus now had a clear path to victory. If Wesley captured the pawn on h3, Magnus could follow up with g3 and rook to b1, securing a checkmate. Wesley avoided this and played rook to e7 instead, but Magnus responded with king to d5. Wesley pushed his pawns in a desperate attempt to promote, but this left him vulnerable. Magnus captured the rook on e7, and when Wesley recaptured, Magnus took the pawn on g2. With this sequence, Magnus established a winning position, threatening rook to b1 and a promotion. Wesley attempted to defend by capturing the bishop on e4, aiming to use his promoted pawn for counterplay. However, Magnus demonstrated his mastery of endgames, finding the perfect move. King to f3. If Wesley promoted his pawn, Magnus could sacrifice his rook and follow up with king to f2, ensuring a promotion and checkmate. Wesley tried to delay the inevitable with king to g1, but Magnus sealed the game with rook to b1. Why did this end the game? Wesley had no choice but to move his king to h2, allowing Magnus to execute the promotion and deliver a checkmate. With this victory, Magnus Carlsen proved once again why he is the greatest endgame player of all time. In a game where most would have given up, Magnus clawed his way back and turned a losing position into a brilliant comeback, showcasing his unparalleled skill and mental resilience.